Hello and welcome to the EPRI Current. I'm your host, Samantha Gilman, and today I'm joined by three experts across the pond to talk today about Ireland's first Hydrogen Valley project, SH2AMROCK. This is part of the EU Horizon projects that our EPRI team actively participates in. So let's meet our guests. First, I'd like to introduce Conor O'Dowd. He is the CEO of the Port of Galway. Next, Rory Monaghan, professor at the University of Galway, and Maria Jaen, European Hydrogen Research here at EPRI. So before we get into the details of the project, I want to give each of you a quick opportunity to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, and maybe how you ended up here. So first, why don't we start with Rory?
Okay, thank you very much, Samantha. So I'm a professor in the University of Galway in the field of energy systems engineering. I have a background in mechanical engineering, also from the University of Galway. But for my graduate studies, I went to your side of the pond. I was in the US in MIT for my graduate studies to try and get an understanding of hydrogen. So I guess I took my interest and passion on hydrogen technologies from the United States back to Ireland, and over the last decade or so have been working on a number of hydrogen themed research projects here.
Excellent. Conor, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, it's lovely to join you this afternoon. I'm an accountant by training, and before I joined the Port of Galway as CEO about 7 years ago. And prior to that, I spent my entire career with KPMG in its Dublin and Galway offices. I suppose from our ports and our port has always been associated with energy. If you go back 20 years, basically our sole product was oil. Now, while we've diversified our cargoes, we have and will continue to play a key role in the renewable energy transition, and hydrogen's part of that. And I think it's well established that, you know, in terms of ports as energy clusters, be it for hydrocarbons or the new emerging technologies such as hydrogen, ports are a key part of the overall mix. And I suppose it was in that context that I became involved in the project, and we're delighted to be involved in it.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Maria.
Hi, Samantha. I am delighted to be here with you today, guys. And I have been working on hydrogen as a vector for decarbonization and energy transition for the last 25 years. So over those years, I have had the opportunity to participate in several projects to develop renewable hydrogen ecosystems in different sectors in order to contribute to clean, safe, reliable, affordable, and equitable access to energy for the public worldwide. At EPRI, I'm collaborating and supporting organizations in the development of these emerging fields and technologies projects, including Hydrogen Valleys, which is the topic that brings us together here today.
So let's set the stage for our listeners. Well, Conor, why don't you tell us more about SH2AMROCK and its role in Ireland's energy journey, specifically the Port of Galway?
I think Rory's probably best placed to talk about the wider SH2AMROCK project, but from our perspective as a port, and I guess the reason and the rationale for our involvement, and I think firstly the reason is ports are integral, as I mentioned before, to energy. So we want to be involved in all energy, and you know, in the past that was hydrocarbons, and now it's in terms of hydrogen, and indeed another big role that the port has played in recent years would be the import of wind turbines. So, you know, when there's energy, ports have a key role to play. The other factor that was really important from a Galway perspective and the Port of Galway and made us ideally suited for the SH2AMROCK project, we're unusual. Lots of ports are outside the city. We're in the heart of the city. And that gave us certain advantages because within our land bank sits the CIE, which would be Ireland's national bus and rail company. So we host within our estate the main bus depot in Galway, and obviously Rory will go on to speak of the potential off-takers, but buses will be a key one. And we also serve, you know, ferry businesses and cargo businesses to the island community, which could be users of hydrogen. I suppose in terms of our role is primarily of a landlord, and we're ideally situated in the heart of Galway City, adjacent to bus companies and potential other users to supply that hydrogen to ultimately the end users of the product.
So Rory, as Conor said, can you give us some more details about Shamrock and its role?
Yes. So before maybe getting into Shamrock, I might just give a brief overview of the rationale behind Shamrock. So as a European Union member state, Ireland is subject to the European targets and regulations in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and energy security. So the major policies that are in place in the European Union right now relate around targets such as cutting EU-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by the year 2030, and then moving towards a net zero emissions situation in 2050. So in order to achieve that, the European Union has prioritized rollout of energy efficiency measures, electrification of energy end uses as much as possible, rollout of zero carbon energy sources, primarily renewables. And this has also been coupled with trying to reduce the European Union's exposure to gas imports from Russia. So with all that in mind, there's the piece of the energy puzzle that is really difficult to decarbonize, that gets sort of left out in most short-term thinking. And that's what's kind of collectively called the hard to decarbonize sectors. And these would be things like heavy duty transport, aircraft and shipping, high temperature industries, and the chemicals industry, oil refining. And then what also gets brought into the equation is we in Europe, we do have a lot of renewable energy resources, and in Ireland in particular, on the northwest coast of Europe, we have a huge amount of potential for offshore wind, onshore as well, but a vast potential for offshore wind. And as we move towards that scenario, we start to have to think about large scale energy storage. And this is something that potentially hydrogen is very suited to. So when we combine our hard to decarbonize sectors with this idea of long-term energy storage, hydrogen emerges as one potential solution to that. So what about Shamrock? Well, we in Ireland, as I said, we are very focused on rolling out our renewable resources here. And there's a sense that quite soon we're going to be hitting the technical limit of what our power grid is going to be able to handle in Ireland. And so we are interested in investigating what comes next. What comes next from a large scale energy storage point of view, from a hard to decarbonize the energy sector point of view, and from potentially an energy exports perspective. So over the last 5 or 6 years, we started having conversations with energy system stakeholders in Galway. These would have focused on wind farm operators, Galway Port, the CIE, the public transport network operator. And between these, we started to see that there was a potential project in the making. We could demonstrate the use of hydrogen at reasonable scale. And this is where this idea of a hydrogen valley has come from.
So quick question. Do you know off the top of your head what the Shamrock stands for? Because there's a 2 somewhere in that word. And I'm curious, do you remember the whole acronym?
I don't remember the whole acronym. I'm sorry. This is one of the conditions of getting European Union funding, is a really snappy project acronym. And I know the 2, the 2 is beside the H, and the H2 is hydrogen.
There you go.
But I don't off the top of my head remember what the acronym means.
There are a lot of acronyms in this business, that's for sure. So Maria, why don't you expand a bit and tell us more about what a hydrogen valley is, and what does the role of a hydrogen valley play in the development of the hydrogen economy?
So happy to do it. Let's do one step back. So the first thing that I would like to share with you today is that hydrogen is not an energy source. Okay, because maybe there are some people that are not familiar with hydrogen, renewable hydrogen. So it's not a source. It's an energy carrier. So we need to produce hydrogen, and then we can use this hydrogen in different sectors. For example, you can use the hydrogen in industry, replacing natural gas in high temperature industrial processes, for example. Or you can imagine that we can use hydrogen in the mobility sector, for example. We can think of hydrogen buses, we can think of trucks, cars, etc. So this hydrogen that is produced from renewable resources that Rory was mentioning, this wind, offshore and onshore wind, save emissions. So the idea here is that it replaces fossil fuels, it replaces emissions, so it helps to decarbonize regions. So the hydrogen valleys include all infrastructures that you can think what you need to produce hydrogen. So you start from renewables, so you need a solar farm, or you need, for example, a wind farm. And then you need to produce this hydrogen. We are going to do it mainly through electrolysis. So we need a hydrogen facility. Then we are going to transport this hydrogen to the different end users. And then we are going to use this hydrogen, for example, in mobility through a hydrogen refueling station, for using, for example, in buses or in vans, or for industry. In phase 2, for example, in this project in a bitumen plant. So the key thing for the hydrogen valleys is that you need to develop all the infrastructures more or less at the same time. So you have to develop production and you have to develop consumption of this, like the infrastructure associated to both things at the same time. So you can, to give you an idea, in worldwide, there is something like almost 100 hydrogen valleys and 70 of them in Europe. So you can have an idea about how the European Commission is pushing for these hydrogen valleys, because they see this instrument super effective as you are developing the whole thing at the same time. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It means that you try to cover all of the challenges, that implies. And then, as you're developing hydrogen and production, you are developing on in between. So you are guaranteeing that it's not a problem that you're producing hydrogen, but I don't have end users, or I have end users that need hydrogen, but this hydrogen is not being produced. So the key point is that they are accelerators of the development of this hydrogen economy in a very sustainable way, because we are trying to develop all the infrastructure at the same time. So this type of projects usually involve 20, 40 partners. So there are a lot of people. Rory and his team, they are doing great job coordinating all of us. But in fact, it's like a lot of infrastructure to be developed at the same time. So this is basically what a hydrogen valley is.
So as Maria was just saying, Conor, there are many participants in this project. And I've heard that includes proposed renewal. Sorry, let me redo that. As Maria said, there are many participants in this project. So Conor, I've heard that the project includes a proposed renewable energy hub for startups and scaling companies at the port. Can you tell us a little bit about that element of the project?
Absolutely, delighted to. And I suppose, again, speaking to the port location in the centre of the city is unusual. And I suppose we're building on two specific advantages of Galway would be it's a very attractive location for startup companies, seen as a very young and vibrant city to start a business from and scale a business from. And Rory and others in the University of Galway and indeed the Atlantic Technological University are doing super work in all areas, renewables. So again, we have land at the port, and our idea would be to, working with others and with government support to site a startup and scaling hub specifically devoted to renewable energy and in particular hydrogen at the port, so that from that centre we could, bring in the universities and the exciting scaling companies and bring them together in a dynamic environment with Galway, working with our third level institutions situated at the port, and the hope then that those companies would, do exciting things, grow and expand, and success would see them leaving the port to move to their own premises. Another aspect of the proposal would be that is certainly our intention that that building would potentially be heated by hydrogen as well, which would again demonstrate the versatility of hydrogen, and that would be something that's factored into our plans. So, we're at the moment with the promoter of the project, who would be, in terms of financing and delivering the building, we're working with them in terms of site selection. And I know that they're going all over Europe, looking at best practice, looking at other renewable hubs, trying to establish those linkages. But it's a very exciting project. And I think capitalizes on the unique advantages, as Rory mentioned, of our region in terms of renewable energy. And we want to see as much supply chain captured by Indigenous Irish companies as possible. And the proposed startup and scaling hub at the port is seen as part of that effort.
Something else that this project mentioned is the use of advanced digital tools. Maria, can you tell us a bit about how hydrogen valleys can benefit from these digital technologies?
So your question refers to a very interesting topic now that digitalization is booming. So digital technologies are transforming how hydrogen valleys operate based on digital twins. So a digital twin is a virtual model that mirrors real-world assets and energy systems. So by integrating real-time data and AI, digital twins help optimize renewable energy generation, hydrogen production, storage, and distribution. So they enable predictive maintenance, improve energy efficiency, and support smarter decision-making across the entire hydrogen value chain. One of the most powerful features of this approach is the ability to run what-if scenarios. So we can simulate the impact of changes in demand, production, or external conditions, for example, and immediately see how the system responds. So this enables us to optimize the balance between the energy demand and the production, ensuring that resources are used efficiently and reliably across the valley. So this is what we are developing at Shamrock. So it's a digital twin that allows us to optimize the performance or operation of the hydrogen valley as a whole. Until now, these tools have been focused more on individual equipment or facilities, a single one. But the next step that we are implementing at Shamrock is the integration of several different infrastructures into a single tool. So these infrastructures include hydrogen production plant, transportation through tube trailers, a hydrogen refueling station, and these different uses. So the idea is to put it all together into a single tool, and we can run these different scenarios to see what happened in some elements, of the hydrogen value chains.
So it's amazing how quickly these podcasts go. I know there is so much more to talk about with the Shamrock Project, and that's why I want to make sure we have time to give each of you some final thoughts to leave with our listeners. So I'd like to start with Rory. What didn't you get to say? What do you want to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to point out is that as Maria outlined what a hydrogen valley involves, it's everything from production to end use through storage and transmission of hydrogen. We believe we have all of those elements in Galway. Conor outlined that Galway is it's a very interesting, exciting place to start a business. But we think it's a very interesting, exciting place to start something like this, to start a hydrogen valley. We have on our doorstep, we have the strongest winds as a country in the world are present in Ireland. Ireland's offshore zone is 7 times larger than the island itself. So, when we think about renewables in Ireland, we're really thinking about redrawing the map of Europe. We're thinking about redrawing the energy map. So we think that that work in renewables, that work in hydrogen, it's got a natural home in Galway. And we hope that what we learn here will be able to spread around the world and help inform other efforts to deeply decarbonize the energy system.
Wonderful. Conor, what are your final thoughts for our listeners?
I suppose it's probably a message I mentioned earlier, but it's the importance of ports to the wider energy transition, and I suppose, Maria made a very good point in terms of hydrogen is created from energy. But you think of energy being onshore wind and offshore wind and indeed solar we're seeing in Ireland. As an island nation, all of the components for each of those energy vectors from which the hydrogen will be produced comes into our port sector. And when you speak to, solar panels can be containerized, but if you think of onshore and offshore wind, particularly offshore wind, you need significantly, enhanced port facilities. And I suppose just my final thought would be that ports such as our own and others in Ireland and elsewhere are fundamental to the energy transition. It's a role we're trying to adopt to as best we can, and it's one we enjoy, and it's one I think we're very proud of. but the ports and the port community are critical to the energy transition, and that would include the transition to hydrogen. We're proud to play our part.
Great. And Maria, we'll give you the final word.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So if any of our listeners are trying to be involved in a hydrogen valley or is thinking in how to be involved or how to create a hydrogen valley, so I can share like a couple of lessons learned. So my first lesson is that there is no single way to define or implement or operate a hydrogen valley. There is no magic formula, no recipe, and it depends a lot on its circumstances and how the valley is created. Having said that, I think that there are three elements that cannot be missing from the beginning. Although having them does not guarantee success, I think that it brings us very close to it. So the first one is you need someone to lead the valley. So usually if this valley is more associated to industrial decarbonization process, there is an industry that is interested in and committed to do this decarbonization. But in other cases, for example, in Shamrock, is an university that is the one that acts as the link between all the partners. And it's not easy to manage because the partners are very different from very different sectors, and they are not familiar working with others. But it's a super fruitful exercise when you start, working and collaborating with others from very different aspects, and you learn like a lot. The second is that the end users must be involved and engaged in the project from the very, very beginning as an active part and with real commitment. If you don't have end users, you don't have hydrogen projects. Maybe other projects are different, but in the case of hydrogen project, including hydrogen valleys, you need both things. You need the production and you need the consumption. Then for sure, there are also like regulatory issues, incentives, and so on. But demand is the first step. And my final thought is like, you need the region. So, Rory was mentioned at the beginning, you need the region where the valley is going to be developed to be super committed and to establish instruments to facilitate the development of the valley. I'm not only talking about the financial issue, that for sure is a very important topic, but I am also talking about efficiency in the processing of permits, licenses, and all of those stuff, establishing regulations in line with the decarbonization strategy. So the commitment and private investment are key part, but they cannot do it alone. So building a partnership that includes every single stakeholder that is interested in participating and committed, for me, is one of the key, elements that you need to have within the hydrogen valley.
Well, Maria, Rory, Conor, thanks so much for joining me today on the EPRI Current. And thank you to our listeners. If you're interested in learning more about the SH2AMROCK Project, we'll put some links down in the episode description. And with that, we'll talk to you next time. If you liked today's show, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast and feel free to share with your colleagues and friends. For more information about EPRI, please visit our website at www.epri.com. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and X at EPRI News. Together, we're shaping the future of energy.